Okay, hello and welcome to the Future Media Podcast. Now, it's my favorite time of the year because now we're starting to see all the financial results for all the big tech companies starting to roll in. And the first one off the rank every year is Netflix. And so Netflix has just reported in the last 24 hours its numbers for last year. They were pretty good. They came in with, I don't know how you did last year on your personal finances, but they came in at US $45.18 billion in revenue, up 16% year on year, with a 29.5% profit margin, which is quite good. That profit margin is slowing down a little bit. The numbers showed that. But Netflix now has 325 million paid subscriptions and it's growing them. And the piece that I found absolutely fascinating is that they have a rapidly growing advertising business. Now, they launched this a few years ago, had a bit of a false start, but now it's starting to grow. So it's up to $1.5 billion last year, growing 2.5 times on the year before. And they're predicting it's going to double again next year. CPMs are rising, prices are going up, and the number of ads they're putting in is also going up. And so you can now have a cheaper Netflix subscription, but it comes with ads, which makes Netflix a very interesting company for me on the media side, but it's also very interesting to people in the broadcast industry. So I'm thrilled that for the first time, I've got a new guest on Future Media podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jen Topping. Let me make an introduction and then you can all get to know her. So Jen, we've known each other peripherally for quite a while. She's a broadcasting veteran. She's also worked in technology and she advises media CEOs all over the world on disruption. So Jen, welcome.
Thank you for having me. This is my very first Substack Live. So if I'm a newbie, I'm very excited to be here.
First of many, I'm sure.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because you should know how to do all of this because you're a broadcast expert, right? So this should be just fine.
Yeah.
So you and I have had a couple of chats recently about the emerging space in broadcast because it's facing the same kind of disruption my print industry experienced with digital and then digital has experienced with AI. And so we've talked about YouTube and we've talked about Amazon. We've also talked about Netflix. But today, let's focus to start with on Netflix. This sounds like a giant success story. What do you think?
I mean, they are a massive success story. We've been talking about them for years, haven't we? About, their upending of the entire broadcast ecosystem and the movie business. And, they've won the streaming wars, which is how everyone refers to them. And their success comes in multiple different ways. Some of it's really obvious. That is, it's a global streaming platform offering high quality TV and movies, but also making their own, but obviously acquiring and licensing a whole back catalogue from all sorts of providers like Warner Brothers Discovery or, HBO or a whole host of titles from Sony, etc. But where their real successes also sit is underneath the hood. So their technology, they invested in building their own content distribution network well over a decade ago, where most broadcasters who got into streaming didn't. So the BBC in the UK, they built their own, what's called a CDN, built their own content distribution network. Amazon obviously have their own through Amazon Web Services. YouTube have their own, so the technology providers have them. But the only one outside of that, who built their own, is Netflix. And that gives them massive technological advantage. Interestingly, another one that has one is Mubi, the art house cinema.
Interesting.
They built their own too. And that gives them, they were quoted as saying that they have 70% more profit margin on their distribution than other people who haven't built their own. So you can see how lucrative that can be. So everyone else, I'm sure in Australia, here in the UK, all of the non-BBC commercial streamers like ITV and Channel 4, etc. And in the US, Disney, Warner Brothers with their Max product, they're all paying someone else to distribute their content. So they'll be paying Amazon Web Services or Akamai or Microsoft to distribute that content. And that gives Netflix such a profound advantage. Then probably the other two ones to draw attention to is that global simultaneous distribution approach that Netflix has, which and being a subscription business as well, means that they can take content and distribute it globally and get the power of all of that online marketing to actually drive people to this content. Bearing in mind that most television is actually, weirdly, a local business. It's a local business that you commission locally for your local audience. And then if it's successful, then you can sell that content internationally. And that's probably the biggest area in TV and in TV production, where Netflix has really disrupted things, where unlike the traditional model, so focusing, say, on Hollywood or on the UK, where producers get paid to make the show, and then if the show's a success, they can own that show and then they can sell it internationally. They'll sell it to Seven or they'll sell it to 10 in Australia, whatever. They'll sell that. And then if you get a real hit on your hands and you get to 100 episodes, for example, you are making serious cash over a number of years. And that's how the shows that we know and love, the Friends of this world or Breaking Bad, or even going back further in time to Full House or Home Improvement or Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, that's why those shows were so valuable, is because of that model. Well, Netflix disrupted that completely. They took a global buyout where there was no ownership. It's work for hire for these production companies. And while that had the upside of paying a lot more for the content, it sort of lost that risk and reward incentivization that existed in the rest of the system that actually encouraged people to make these types of shows. So that's sort of another area where they've been hugely successful, but also massively disruptive in the content production market and in Hollywood and in TV production across the world.
Interesting. So I have a personal attachment to this story that you're describing because um, I don't think we've spoken about this before, but I launched a free streaming service, a free ad funding streaming service in Australia around the same time as the national broadcaster did here. I was
Mm-hmm.
obsessed with BBC iPlayer, which I couldn't get in Australia, and I was obsessed with Hulu, and I couldn't get that here either. And I actually brought Hulu here to Australia to try and get the media companies here to invest in Hulu, and they all said no, and I think they're all kicking themselves a bit now. But
Mm-hmm.
the story I told them when they said, "Well, why do we need this? We have really successful commercial television." I said to them, "Look, you see, the thing is that Australia is a nation of illegal downloaders. We have the highest illegal download rate in the world per capita, okay? And that's not because we have the best media, it's because we restrict access to the best media. And if we listen to our customers, okay, then the right thing to do is to introduce streaming, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they were absolutely adamantly against it. So I did a deal with Bloomberg and the BBC, and I launched a free streaming service through one of the largest publishers here. It's called SMH TV after the Sydney Herald. And
Mm-hmm.
from every day from 6 p.m. until midnight, we streamed long form television programming with ads, and it became very, very popular. And so I understand that. But if you don't put the consumer at the start of the
Yeah.
consideration, then you eventually get outmoded by somebody who does. And the way I described this was, to these very cantankerous media executives here that hated this idea. I just basically said, look, if you take a law abiding family of four and you put them outside a supermarket and you don't feed them for 2 weeks, eventually I guarantee to you they're going to smash the window. Okay. And they don't want to break the law, but they will. And if you don't give them access to the media that they know the rest of the world has, they will break the rules and they'll illegally download it. Now, Australia has a very thriving streaming world industry now, as does everybody else in the world. And we got Netflix late, but it's dominant
Mm-hmm.
here by an absolute mile. So I think if you service the consumer, then you will eventually find a way to the future. And tech companies have generally done that quite well.
Well, exactly. And I think this is where, so I think Australia has a distinctive story. I write a lot about saying America is not the world, because the American experience, specifically in this space, is very different to the rest of the world. And also, I'm based in London. The UK experience is also very different to everywhere else too. So to your point, in 2006, that's when the BBC launched iPlayer, although I worked for a rival organisation. I worked for Channel 4 and I worked on the launch of 4OD, which was Channel 4's video on demand service. So this was a comprehensive catch up and archive video on demand service of everything that Channel 4's ever made. Not quite, but a huge volume of titles,
Hmm.
plus catch up. So if you missed a show, an hour later you could catch up online. I have to say, because this is petty, Channel 4 beat the BBC to its launch. Yes, there's many of us who worked on that launch and we've still
We're
got
allowed to
an
be
eye on that.
competitive. That's where the
We're
best stuff
competitive.
happens. It's what keeps us energetic.
Or it makes me sound petty 20 years later. That's another way of looking at it. But
Claim the victory.
claim the victory. In real time, I watched exactly what you just described. So you could go onto LimeWire or illegal streaming platforms. Every morning, I had half a ton of alerts set up, and the shows that had been on Channel 4 the night before were all popping up there where people had recorded them and put them on illegal download sites. And these weren't, not to insult the program makers, but this wasn't, Desperate Housewives. This was stuff like how to look good naked or how clean is your house, just bog standard factual entertainment shows that were on at the 8 o'clock schedule. They were all appearing. Someone was making the effort to record them and put them into, onto a download service. As 4OD launched, you just watched all of that dry up. It just stopped, because why bother? Why bother recording this and putting it on a download service when I can literally go and click play, watch an ad, and I'm watching the content, 2 minutes later? It just completely blitzed that entire illegal download market. But America had such a different ecosystem, partly because it's not geographically coherent in terms of this gets a bit complicated, but and I'm going to try and simplify it. But in broadcast terms and in internet access terms, it's sort of carved up geographically. So you'll be living in Texas and you will get your cable connection, for example, through your internet provider, and that will be Comcast. And if you live, 10 minutes down the road, it will be another provider. So for the studios and the broadcasters, the ABCs and Disney and all of these providers, when they got like 25+% of their income from those types of carriage deals with internet providers, to then say, oh, by the way, we're going to launch a similar service to what I've just described, that Channel 4 had or BBC had back in 2006, we're going to launch that and it's going to ride like a coach and horses through all of those agreements. That it's almost impossible. So they just sort of outsourced their thinking to Netflix. They said, well, let's let that tiny little DVD business over there be our streamer for us. We'll give them all our archive, not our catch up, but we'll give them all our archive. They can do that. And then they watch this cuckoo in the nest grow until, in the 2018, there or thereabouts, they started pulling their content back onto their own services. But by then, Netflix was away to the races, wasn't it? By then, they'd already made House of Cards. They'd already started heavily investing billions, into their content production engine. Their technology stack was hugely advanced, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of, they created this beast, and then that beast comes into all of these existing markets. So, I think the UK broadcast ecosystem thought, well, we're okay here because we have our own platforms. We have catch up and video on demand services on every device imaginable. Like, all of these all of these services are on like 15 devices. We'll be fine. But actually, Netflix is such a disruptor. Never mind all the other disruptors. It just made it made the local nature versus Netflix's global play. It really brought that into sharp focus.
Yeah. So this is fascinating to me, because this is kind of a retelling of history that I remember really well. So I was in the news industry, in the newspaper industry, when we did the first ever deal with Google. It's the second time I've talked about it today. It was such a seminal moment. And we took the view that, we were an advertising business. We were dominant in our country. We were untouchable. Content was king. Google was a search engine. Therefore, putting our content on their search engine would get us traffic, which we would sell, and therefore we would succeed. We never even considered that they would become a competitor to us in advertising. They'd never become a competitor to us in anything else. And here we are, fast forward 25 years later, and they're utterly dominant, and the industry that we came from has shrunk. So let me share a funny anecdote with you. I'm sure you've been to IBC a few times in Amsterdam. It's the International Broadcasting Conference. It's a huge, great thing. Lots and lots of execs turn up. And so a few years ago, good time ago now, would have been 2013, 14.
Mm-hmm.
I got to a keynote event with the director of Hidden Dragon Tiger, Hidden Tiger.
Oh yeah,
whatever it is. You remember?
Crouching Badger, Hidden Tiger.
That's the one. Yeah, that's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. That one. And so anyway, so I get up on stage and I'm halfway through my presentation. This is kind of a bit well known now. There's some clips of this on YouTube. I basically, about halfway through, this guy starts heckling me from the audience, and he was a German broadcaster. And I was warning that what had just happened to the print industry was likely to come and happen to the broadcast industry. But this was in 2014, so they weren't feeling it. And this guy shouts from the audience in a German accent. He says, "We've never lost a single dollar to big tech, and we never will." And I didn't really know. I'd never been heckled on stage before. So I walked off the stage to the right and still had my mic on. And I said to the lady off stage, I said, "This is an annual event, isn't it?" And she said, "Yeah." And so everybody heard me say that because I was off stage. I walked back on stage and I said, "I'll be back next year, but I'm not sure you will be."
Mm.
And there was like the outrage. And the guy actually found me outside just afterwards and gave me the shoulder barge in the corridor as a kind of bullying gesture. Yeah. But the point I was trying to make was that just because you're dominant today means you're sometimes blind to the chasing pack. And so,
Absolutely.
and you've become so used to being dominant or the disruptor, because you probably were in the past, or you're so busy competing with your competitor, you're not paying attention to anybody coming in out of your normal field of vision. Netflix was exactly that. And I remember the first time I saw Hulu, I was just like, goodness me,
Yeah.
this is fabulous. I can take it with me everywhere. And to your point, Windows, right? You can only watch these shows in this area at this time
Yeah.
because we've decided. That's not
Yeah.
consumer first. Okay. And
No.
so the consumer will just go, I can watch everything whenever I feel like it. For me, it's called binging now. But for me at the time, it was just like, wow, choice. I like this. Yeah. So it has
Yeah.
broken a lot of rules.
If I come back to that point in a second around choice and windowing, because there's a negative consequence to that, the bundling thing. But exactly that mode is, I mean, I think that German broadcaster is incredibly wrong, and probably in my experience at the time was completely out of step with the sensibilities that were happening in broadcasters, certainly in the broadcasters I was working
Good.
in the UK. Whereas, but it's that classic point, isn't it, that you think you've done it. And that's what the age of internet disruption is about, is that everything is constantly shape-shifting and moving. Every company is changing its strategy. Everyone's pivoting. Everyone's scrapping. There is no stable new normal. Whereas I think for broadcasters, and I think, it's not, I'm not some sage who was saying this at the time. I think everyone felt, well, we've done it now. We've got TV everywhere. We've put TV everywhere, a single touch point that a user would want it. We've put our content everywhere. We've put it in on devices and in ways that we think that they want to. We're sort of done here. And that's our new normal. And actually that's not how it works, because there's competitors appearing from left, right, and center. And that comes back to Netflix, which today is such a fascinating and huge success story. But what I think it's showing is it's now looking. My analogy is, I overwork it way too much. Is, that scene in Game of Thrones where Jon Snow is having the final battle, the Battle of the Bastards with the Boltons, and he sort of turns around, and then there's just yet marauders coming over the hill. That's how I think it feels for many people working in broadcasting and streaming and in content. Is that you think, okay, I've got my position now, and then you turn around and then here comes someone else, and you've got to pivot or change or adapt. There is no new normal where, okay, now this will be the stable world in which we're existing in, and that you just can't stand still, and that makes it, the constant chopping and changing, the innovator's dilemma, everything that we're operating with, incredibly challenging, especially when you're dealing with IP, creative businesses, storytelling that is really expensive to produce relative to other media forms.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I was on a podcast earlier today talking with an insider from Apple.
Mhm,
And we were talking about the difference about leading from the front and leading when you're in the chasing pack. It's very easy to
mhm,
chase because you can see the target. If you're in the lead, it's very difficult to look backwards because you're so intent on going forwards.
mhm,
And so I think a large part of the problem for lots of traditional media companies has been that they're dominant and therefore they think they can't be caught, and then they do. But it's an interesting thing because now Netflix is in that lead position, many people
mhm,
would say. And so for the first time, it's finding itself there and having to figure out how to stay ahead. So it's actually done some interesting things. And I'm really interested in your views on this in terms of their kind of business model and their strategy for how to stay ahead. I mean, we've talked a little bit about games. They've introduced
mhm,
games. I'd like to talk a little bit about advertising. They've also been kind of adapting some of their podcasting, and then they've been starting
mhm.
to adapt some of the types of programming they're making. What do you think of their strategy? What's your takeaway of how they're going?
I mean, when you listen to them talk, I mean, that it's Ted Sarandos, like you listen to him talk, he knows his onions, that man. They're very, very impressive operation. And there's always just a little but. If you imagine that the game that they're in is trying to be your entertainment platform of choice, entertainment brand of choice, so they are your go to. If you look
Mm,
at the day that everyone has before, well, say now, you might go to them of an evening to watch. high quality programming on their platform. But during the rest of the day, you might be listening to podcasts, but you're doing that through Apple Podcasts or Spotify or maybe YouTube, because there's so many podcasts on YouTube. You might be playing casual games on your mobile. You might be reading news. You might be watching vertical videos on Instagram or on Reels or on TikTok or whatever. So if you want to be in this game of being the entertainment brand of choice, then you have to start entering all of these other spaces where people consume media during their average day. You have to be present in all of these moments to be able to capture people and give them, which they call, which I think is quite interesting, member value. To give member value for that subscription, you have to capture them throughout the course of the day. I just wonder in general about that as a strategy, because it's quite a different mode, with the way people engage with video podcasts, for example, or podcasts in general. It's sort of quite different from how you sit down and watch and binge watch a TV show, a premium TV show, which is the market that they're in. The games piece is, my view on their game strategy is they've hired a really interesting person from Epic Games, which made Fortnite, to run their game strategy. Yep. At the moment, my games, so I was interested to hear what they said, because they're talking about party experiences, Boggle, when you can co-play games with your family, but also stuff related to their IP and brands. I've yet to have that rolled out to me as an experience, and that they were quite clear on that that's not been rolled out globally. But my games experience for them is it's solitaire. I mean, they talk about Red Dead Redemption, and they also had Grand Theft Auto on the platform. And I'm like, really? Is from Netflix? I go in there and I play, a 10-year-old AAA box set game on your platform? Or my kid, who's 7, through my Netflix account, I can download Sonic Dash free of ads for him on his iPad. I mean, I'm grateful for it, that I don't have to sit through the awful ads and in-app purchases and him nagging me to get in-app purchases. Really? Is that what I look to Netflix for? So I just think that some of the games piece at the moment is muddying the waters. They've tried to do some companion apps around reality TV shows. Again, I wonder if these were really punching through, I think they would be talking about the impact that they're having. So at the moment, I think it's a watch this space on games. I understand why they're doing it. I think they're super smart. They know they need to be present in people's lives, because I think that's the other big ongoing battle that it may not be apparent to everyone. If you look, you mentioned Apple. Why is Apple spending $7+ billion on content, making great shows, but their usage is very, very low because they don't have a massive amount of archive? They've not got that Netflix or Amazon footfall. Well, the reason that they're doing it is because they want to be the operating system of everyone's lives, and they're using a whole host of activities, devices, services and content to try and make you stay within the Apple ecosystem. And in that world, well, Netflix is competing, and is competing with Apple, it's competing with Amazon, but they're also competing with LG, that makes your fridge and your washing machine, who are acquiring content so that on a connected TV, you watch LG content. So the competition is not just media companies, they're not just platforms, they're also device manufacturers or consumer electronic product companies. So that the edge of the landscape is much further than it ever used to be, purely when it was TV or from your background, or print. So it's sort of everything is competing with everything at the moment.
100%. And so there's a temptation, if you're an ad company, all right, not a subscription company, if you're an ad company, that you want to engage people as much as possible. The longer you've got the person on the screen, the more ads you can sell, and it changes your business. So if Netflix didn't have an ad business, I don't think it would be in games. I think it would have stayed pure play subscription television and would have invested the money in making television. And one of the criticisms of lots of platforms as they start to mature and try to eke out more money from their audience is that they will, if you like, diversify. It would be the business or the boardroom description of what they're doing. Other people might say that you're actually diluting your experience to try and get people to stay for longer, so you can sell them some ads. Let me tell you what my experience was with the streaming platform that I launched here, because it was very interesting. We took a very different view of how to do this. Instead of increasing ad load or increasing pricing or increasing content, because we were allied to a media company, a news media company, we used algorithms, very, very early AI. This was way back 2000, 7, 8, we analyzed the output of the news every day and basically said this has been a sad news day or a good news day or a whatever day. And we learned what people were interested in and what they were reading and what they were engaged in and what they cared about. And then if it was a really bad news day, we would counter program in the evening to put on positive programming to make people feel better. And if it was a day where the main narrative had been positive news about a breakthrough in global warming, for example, then we go and get a David Attenborough documentary and screen that between 6 and midnight. And so we actually used algorithms of people's mental states, if you like, at the moment when they hit the screen to program for them, recognizing what they were doing. I am extremely confident that that will be one of the things that Netflix launches this year, because
Mhm.
it's going to realize fairly soon that just trying to fill people's time with another ad product is not going to satisfy the premium Netflix, I'm a solution to your problem world. I think they're going to find that there's a customer exhaustion level where this actually starts to work against them. So I think they're going to be in a touch of bother there. Something I wanted to pick up on, though, that you said to me before is really interesting as well. So you think that Netflix is too narrow in its choice of programming as well. It's blockbusters, it's movies, it's
Mm.
periodicals, it's glamorous drama about the 1800s, whatever it might be. It's become very, very good at that, and there's loads of them in these niches. And frankly, if I see another crime drama pop up about a policeman that's lost his mind and now it's personal because it's affected his family, I'm done with it. I don't want to see anything like that for at least another 10 years. But you think they're missing a trick on some of the things that perhaps broadcast knows?
Yeah, and this isn't new. I mean, this is something that someone like Entertainment Strategy Guy has been saying for like 6 years. So it's noticeable when you actually suddenly can't think about it. You go, oh yeah. So what Netflix did by that upending of the business model and taking those global rights, what it meant was, and because they're a subscription business, the TV business of old, they wanted to hook you in for 18 plus episodes. Come here
Hmm.
every week and watch Grey's Anatomy, House, Criminal Minds, The Shield, whatever. Come here every week, lots of comedies, Big Bang Theory, those types of shows. They're very familiar. They're procedurals, they're single episodes, they're comfortable. You come and watch them every week. You watch 18 plus episodes week in, week out. Advertising gets sold around it. That's the television model. It's not rocket science. That's how it works. And then if you get a bankable hit, 100 plus episodes, then you can sell that internationally. Everyone involved makes an absolute fortune. The talent, the writers, the director, showrunner, etc. Anyone who is able to earn from residuals makes a fortune in the UK. The production company owns the rights. They sell that internationally. Everyone's a winner. Everyone's happy. That whole structure isn't what Netflix is engaged in. Netflix, because it doesn't need to get those people in to sell advertising every week. Instead, look at how many shows, the average run rate, it's 8 eps. It's pretty consistently now 8 eps
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah, I've seen that.
premium drama. So if you go, and so it's all pushed up in terms of cost, it's often very, very glossy. But from a production and a creative perspective, it's much harder to create characters, tell stories in that time. It's often serialized, so they're bookended. So you have to watch all of them to get the full story. They're not episodic in the way that some of the other shows that I've just mentioned were single episodes, but with the characters become familiar, comfortable people in your lives. So you come back to them week in, week out. So you've ended up with this whole tranche of programming that isn't made by Netflix, not at the volume and not at the style or type. And if we just focus on it's procedurals, it's soaps, and it's sitcoms. And that gap, I think it's a baby in the bathwater situation in the upending that happened in television. And then everyone rushed to this 8 episode serialized glossy model. In that upending, I think a baby went out with the bathwater. And I wonder, especially with the ad model coming in here, whether Netflix will find a way to satisfy that desire that users had. If I give you a little example, I took a screen grab of something that someone said, and this is really common. So it's not just me as a commentator saying this. You find audiences saying this all the time. Someone wrote, what's really sad is there's no good comfort shows being made by any streamer, and certainly no shows that will have 100 plus episodes for people to keep returning back to the golden age of syndication. Shows are now short and intense and lack the filler episodes that make them comfortable. So there's an audience. That's not just one person. You can find people all over the internet sort of nostalgically missing the types of shows that we all watched. And then what's happening now is people are watching those shows on these platforms. NCIS, bankable performer on Netflix. It's The Friends, it's CSI, it's House, it's all of those shows that often make up a lot of the views on these platforms. And if no one's making them in the future, then we're going to sort of run out of these types of shows. So I do wonder if Netflix, etc., will find a route back to making that type of content. In the great upending, sometimes things get thrown out, and I think that's one thing that's been thrown out that actually is being missed already by audiences and probably will be missed by the platforms themselves in the future.
Interesting. Okay. So Netflix argues that it has access to all of this data and it can pretty much predict what's going to be a banger and what's not going to be. And so it's got this, that was always its story, wasn't it? We know what the future is going to look like until we can tell. Which is very interesting because one of the downsides of its reporting today in its numbers was its continued chasing of Warner Brothers Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Huge, big movie and TV broadcasting business, makes a lot of programming, syndicates a lot of programming, sells a lot of programming, has its own channels, has its own streaming platforms. It's kind of across the gamut now. But it seems that Netflix is really intent on buying this. And I find this really interesting. I understand that they want access to the catalog, but they could probably buy the catalog for a whole lot less than buying the whole company. So it felt, well, it's certainly, actually, it's not so much what I think. It's probably more what the shareholders think. And they voted a little bit today with their discontent. It feels like Netflix has disrupted the old business and is now trying to buy into being more like the old business it disrupted. So why would it Netflix be kind of buying backwards? What do you think's behind that?
I think that is this. So I found the whole, and I'm not alone in this. We found the whole offer to buy Warner Brothers. So it's not Warner Brothers Discovery; it's just Warner Brothers. So that's
Oh,
interesting
is
in
that
and of
right?
itself. So
Okay.
just the Discover. So they split. Zaslav at Warner Brothers Discovery split the company back. So it merged everything into one company and is now undergoing the process of splitting it back out again. So there's a whole conversation to be had about whoops, why did that happen? But the Discovery part is where this is a very debt-laden company. I can't remember the exact number. At the point of merger, it's like 44 billion in debt. I mean, it's a huge amount of debt, and the bulk of it's gone into the Discovery channels part of its operation. So the Warner Brothers studios, which has got HBO inside of it, that has much less debt. So that makes it a more compelling offer. The irony being that there's a whole ton of IP sitting in the Discovery part of that relationship, but it is laden with and the IP that sits in the Discovery part is an IP that Netflix doesn't really have. It's on reality type shows and
Right.
servicing different audiences. So that's quite interesting. But and I think that's just like, well, we don't want that, and that's channels. We don't want that. We'll leave that over there. The reason that I think that they're interested, and they said themselves that they went into it not wanting to buy, and now we're actually quite excited about it, goes back to my point about what they're missing, of what, despite this, Sonny Bunch said there's the acre of content spend that they've made, northwards of 10 billion, a year going on over a decade. They haven't got anything that touches the sides when it comes to the HBO archive. So think about it. Where is Netflix's Breaking Bad? Where is The Sopranos? Where is any of the type of HBO-esque shows? They haven't really got that. So they're I think it's an admission that they're missing a catalogue of that quality, despite obviously Netflix having a huge amount of quality. Then it's not quite as solid a performer as HBO. HBO is an extraordinary machine in what they've produced, especially bearing in mind it's not like it's this jewel that is being left sitting there to produce content, in this ivory tower. HBO has been moved from pillar to post, and the stress that's been put on the people who work there for decades, and they've still managed to churn out bankable, extraordinary telly. So there's that. I think that's an admission, as I said, of a gap in their commissioning strategy. So they get that quality. It gives them access. So they're a non-diversified business, right? If you look at all of Netflix's competitors, they're all diversified. Now, some people might say, well, they're non-diversified, therefore they can focus much more purely on their content business and themselves as an entertainment brand. But if you look at, say, Amazon, obviously, Amazon Web Services, Amazon e-commerce business, YouTube, Google, Disney, parks, merch, It's cinematic. Every single competitor they have is got more than one revenue stream. And Netflix, there is a way of interpreting this, is they're just a bit vulnerable because they only have this one revenue stream and there's only this one platform in their streaming. And that's why, they've done some live events, they're talking about experiences. There's stuff that's trying to move beyond just that one successful revenue stream. If you look at the difference in revenue, though, you know, Disney's income is 91 billion. And advertising is only a small fraction of that, or significantly less than half than that. They are nowhere near as big in terms of advertising. You know what we've just sorry in terms of overall revenue. You know, YouTube makes more than them. Reels from Meta is on target to make more than YouTube this year, and Amazon is bigger than all of them. So you can see that there's a vulnerability there by not having additional revenue streams. And I wonder if this deal is partly about a catalogue. It's also partly about a route into cinematic, which is an admission, I think, that everyone knows. This has been well documented again by, I've mentioned already, Entertainment Strategy Guy has been banging on about this for years, is that releasing movies on streamers is nowhere near as successful as releasing movies in the cinema. But many of the movies that are released on streamers, i.e. on Netflix, are not really cinematic movies. They're made for Netflix movies. They're not made
Yeah.
for cinema movies that have been put on Netflix. So I think that IP will also be hugely valuable to them. But I do wonder where their additional revenue stream is. You know, I think, why haven't they gone into cloud streaming? They've got their own CDN. Why haven't they created a Netflix-esque product the same as Amazon Web Services and host and distribute third-party video on demand streaming services? I mean, I'm sure they'll go, oh God, there's very good reasons for that. But it's interesting that they haven't got something else in their armory. And I think that's the one to watch for over the coming years.
Okay, so let me do a quick fire round. Okay.
Oh God.
So here you go. You got $1 million to invest. All right. Would you invest it in Netflix? Would you invest it in Warner Brothers? Would you invest it in Amazon Prime? Would you invest it in Apple TV? Would you invest it in YouTube? Stack rank them for me. Who do you think is coming out as the winner in the next 3 to 5 years?
Purely on the streaming bit or the overall business?
On money.
On money. I would put my chips on Amazon. I think Amazon is the company that is going to come out. They've got vast catalogs. They have absorbed so many fast and streaming channels. If I go to Amazon and I sign up to a subscription through Amazon, they get a share of the revenue. They've stacked up tons and tons of streaming brands underneath within their marketplace. They are aggressive, money focused. Their product isn't as market leading as I think it could be, but I think that will come. I think they're the one to watch. I think YouTube, if you look at YouTube is going to come. Everyone gets really excited about YouTube, and understandably so. But YouTube has half the operating income of Netflix. You know, there are much. You know, their infrastructure costs are vast, absolutely vast, and you can see that if you look at comparison between YouTube and Netflix in terms of live streaming. You know, the Tyson versus Paul boxing match, lots of people had degraded experiences, whereas YouTube hardly ever goes down and is live streaming tons and tons of concurrent streams all the time. And
Yeah.
it's not a criticism of Netflix because live streaming is really, really hard. It's just a reflection on how much infrastructure YouTube has to be able to support itself as a business. And that comes off, you know, that is reflected in their operating costs. Plus, of course, they also have to spend so much more of their income with share it with creators and rights holders and whatnot. So I think YouTube is going to come under increasing pressure from the TikToks and the Reels and all of these other people chewing into that side of their business. I think Netflix will come under increasing pressure. I think Apple's play, if Apple bought Disney, I think then that's an interesting proposition. Apple without, and Apple, you've got to remember that Apple's profitability is really coming from its services business and not from its device business. So there's an interesting, what's going to happen in Apple over the next couple of years. But without buying something and massively increasing its library, its content library, yes, I love Snow Horses. Yes, I love their originals, but it's not something that I return to daily. I mean, even monthly. I go for a particular series and then I leave. So
Okay.
for me, I will always come back to Amazon. I think I think they're the dark horse that and have so many income streams, as well as that Amazon Web Services, which makes up what 60 plus 70% of their profit margin comes from of their operating income. Sorry, comes from Amazon Web Services. So yeah, they'll be the ones with the deepest pockets and the desire to be the everything platform and the capability.
Amazing.
Might be
All
the
right.
follow.
So last thing, marks out of 10 for Netflix today. We're going to give it a grade. So it's going to get marks out of 10. You're a school teacher. You're going to give it marks out of 10 for a good job. Ted Sarandos, I'm giving you.
I would give him a 7 because I think it's an extraordinary business. I think there are gaps in their content commissioning that is going to become more and more frustrating for users. And I think it's more a future look of, oh goodness, as much as they're doing everything that they can to ward off this competition in the way that they're tackling it, it's looking to the future and thinking this is just going to get more and more challenging for all of these companies, but especially for an undiversified business like Netflix. Having said that, he's Ted Sarandos. So they're very gifted company, and yeah, they're hugely impressive.
Amazing. Well, Jen, thanks so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat today. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it more than having to watch an ancient Hindi movie from Netflix. So it's been much better for me. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm sure we will catch up again. And thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.